What's up, everybody? Welcome to a new show. You can see the setting is new. Well, you can't see John, but we got a new blue background, the blue light in the background. Something's different. Well, we have a new show. John and I are going to be doing a weekly fantasy football show, strictly fantasy football, talking about weekly picks, injuries that happen, John's favorites for that week, any must-sit players, fantasy strategies, and then eventually, once we get a couple shows under our belt, we'll be able to do a Q&A section where we'll answer the most popular questions. Well, John will. This is John's show, I should say. This is John's fantasy football show. I'm just the moderator. I'm the host, so I just keep things moving. But yes, this is going to be a weekly show that we have, and it's going to be strictly fantasy football just for you guys. Haven't really figured out, a specific date as to far when we'll post it, but for right now, Saturdays are looking like the day to post. So Saturday morning, you'll get a fantasy football show, and yeah. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So we're filming this on Friday. So yesterday was the Thursday night game, and we wanted to talk about that just a little bit. So Darnold played well. Panthers beat who was it?
The Texans.
Texans. I forget about the Texans. Just don't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
Darnold played well. DJ Moore played well, but I think the main storyline was Christian McCaffrey. He only got 6 fantasy points. And before he ended up leaving the game, it looked like he re-aggravated his hamstring. So they had to pull him from the game. Give us your thoughts on McCaffrey, and then give us your thoughts on the Thursday night game as a whole.
So, yeah, very unfortunate. McCaffrey gets taken off with the hamstring injury. The most concerning part about it is that they took him into the blue tent, that blue tent they have on the sideline. He goes into the tent. He comes out a minute or two later, and it's like, boom, right away, he's done for the game. That's a little concerning. Not even like, okay, let's stretch it out. Let's see what we can do. Maybe you could jog a little bit. No, you're done for the night. Go back to the locker room. Okay, that tells me that he's probably not going to play next week. And we're going to have to see how the MRI goes this weekend. Now, a lot of you DMing me on Instagram asking me, okay, do I use my waiver on Chuba Hubbard, the backup? So obviously you have until Tuesday night to decide if you want to use your waiver on Hubbard, but definitely wait, see what the reports are, see how the tests go with McCaffrey. If he's out, which I'll touch on this next week, but if he's out for 5 or 6 weeks, I would use my waiver on Chuba Hubbard. If he's only out for like a week or 2 weeks and they're going to put him back in, I really wouldn't pick up Chuba Hubbard. It only depends on who their matchup is that week. If they're playing a really bad team and you really need a win that week, then you could use your waiver on him. But I would be careful about that. But that's super unfortunate for McCaffrey fans and people that got the number 1 pick because you were hoping to have your number 1 pick for the whole season. And one other thing I wanted to touch on with that game is Robbie Anderson. It's actually getting very concerning how many targets he's getting. DJ Moore got, I want to say 10 targets over in double digits last night, and he had 126 yards, 8 catches, and Robbie Anderson ended up with 2 targets. And we know when they played the Jets in week 1, he got that 1 touchdown, but it was a 56-yard touchdown, and that was his only catch of the game. So things are starting to worry me about Robbie Anderson. I don't know why they're not using him, but it's time to put him on the bench. So I would not start him next week unless you really have to, because getting 2 targets is really bad for somebody who's on a pretty good offensive team. Now, obviously, if McCaffrey stays injured and doesn't play, that will upgrade Anderson's status for next week. But we're going to have to see how that plays out. Right now, I'm thinking you got to put Anderson on the bench. But one other thing.
I was going to say for Anderson, did you see he had like a little comeback route and they threw to him like a short 2 or 3 yard comeback and he just dropped it. Like it was straight on the numbers and he just dropped it.
Yeah.
And it just seems like I texted you, it just seems like his specialty and the way that they want to use him is just strictly deep threats.
Yeah, just deep. And it's funny you mentioned that because that makes sense that he only got 2 targets because you saw the whole game. The Texans were playing 2 deep safeties, and you can't go deep on that. So maybe that's why Robbie Anderson didn't get any targets because they were like, we won't throw it deep. And then they forget about him. They're like, all right, we won't throw it deep. We're not using them. So that stinks. But one other thing I wanted to touch on, not really related to fantasy, but relating to last night's game is, have you ever heard of the Tyrod Taylor theory?
Yes.
You did hear about that?
I heard about it. I don't know. I don't know. There's some inconsistencies for Texans and then comparing all the other Tyrod situations.
I know. For anybody who doesn't know, the Tyrod Taylor theory is that he was on the Bills, and we know like 5 years ago. 2017, he takes them to the playoffs. They lose in the wild card round, but that year they draft Josh Allen, and now he's their franchise quarterback. So Tyrod goes to the Browns, and the Browns draft Baker Mayfield. He's their franchise quarterback. So then Tyrod Taylor goes to the Chargers, and then he gets that punctured lung, and Justin Herbert comes in. He seems like their franchise quarterback. So Tyrod Taylor goes to the Texans, and he gets hurt. So now they need to put Davis Mills in. So is Davis Mills their franchise quarterback? We don't know. That's interesting.
All right. So the one consistency is the rest of them were first round draft picks.
True. And Mills is a third round pick.
But I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but like, how does Tyrod just it's like clockwork that like the second week or third week,
he always gets injured.
He always just happens to have an injury.
That's so crazy.
Yet he always wins the starting job.
Yeah, that he always wins it going into the year, and then
he's like, even if he's healthy, he's not going to win it back. Like,
yeah, he's not. He's done.
He's going to hop to the next team. So we'll see about that. So a good recap. Let's move on to a little segment that we have called Worry or Wait. Now I'm going to list 5 fantasy players. John's going to tell me you should worry about them or if you should wait on those players. Some pretty big names, actually. So the first one, Calvin Ridley from the Falcons.
So if you have Calvin Ridley, a lot of people have been asking me, I want to trade Ridley. What should I get for him? Now, obviously, there is always a price for somebody. So there are, players you can get for Ridley, but it's only week 2, guys. Ridley led the team in targets week 1 and week 2, which is encouraging. Unlike Robbie Anderson, who's got a large decrease in target share. But Ridley had 8 targets week 1, 10 targets week 2 against the Bucs. He ended up getting into the end zone. So you got to wait with Ridley. This Atlanta Falcons team, obviously, it's a great situation for fantasy. They don't have a good defense. So it's going to be great for Ridley because they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. And Cordero Patterson got 2 touchdowns last week, a bunch of yards receiving and a receiving touchdown. But I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I think that more had to do with the weather. That day, it was in Tampa Bay, it was almost 100 degrees, and Mike Davis and Patterson were splitting time. And it just so happened that the Bucs were leaving the running backs open because they were up by so many points. So going forward, definitely keep Ridley. It's only week 2, like I said, and we'll see how he does. Just hold on to him for now.
Okay, so no worries there. This one is a big worry, I would say. Ezekiel Elliott. Now he's getting, he's getting less carries than Tony Pollard.
I know, it's crazy. Week 1, it was good. He had 11 carries. Pollard had 3 carries. Then we go to week 2 against the Chargers. He did have 16 carries and Pollard had 13, but Pollard had 3 catches out of the backfield and Zeke only had 2. So Zeke's got 18 touches last week. Pollard got 16. That's too much of a split for me, especially on a team that doesn't run the ball that much. I mean, against the Chargers, we were pretty shocked that they ran the ball 35 times like they did. They usually don't run the ball that much. So for a team that doesn't run the ball much and to be splitting time that much, and not only that, but on third downs, it's usually Pollard that's in the game. So I think I touched on this earlier in the podcast, one of our other podcasts, but I would start to worry about Zeke if you had him. And I actually have him in our fantasy league, our 6-team league. I would start to worry about him. if you have him, you might want to start trading him. If you could pair Zeke with one of your bench wide receivers for like a Nick Chubb or something, or just go Zeke for Chris Carson straight up, I would rather have Chris Carson the rest of the year. So I would start to look elsewhere with Zeke. Maybe try to find somebody in your league that's a Cowboys fan and it has a little more, partial towards Zeke, and then see what you can get from them. Maybe you can get a flex player. Maybe you're not deep on wide receivers, and you can get somebody, somebody wide receiver. Just shop around, I'd say, for now, because I don't really like how that situation's going in terms of Zeke and Pollard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely worry about Zeke. Let's talk about something that we talked about on the podcast. George Kittle. Should we worry or wait about George Kittle?
Yep. So we did talk about this earlier in this week. I said wait on Kittle. I know he only had 4 catches in week 1, 4 catches in week 2, but in week 2 he only had 17 yards on those 4 catches. But you obviously got to wait if you have Kittle. Don't try to get a lot of other tight ends. Don't sell him low. If people are trying to trade for him, just keep him, because this week against the Packers, with all these banged up running backs that the 49ers have, I think they're going to have to throw the ball, and they can't throw it to Debo every play. He's going to be guarded by Jair Alexander. So I think Kittle, this week is the week he gets over 50 yards and a touchdown. So definitely hold on to him for one more week, and then you can ask me about him next week. But he's going to be one of the top 3 or 4 tight ends by the end of the season. So definitely hold on to him. Let's see how he does this week against Green Bay.
Okay, so we're going to wait on George Kittle. Another one, Antonio Gibson. Now, he is one like Zeke. He's battling some carries with J.D. McKissick.
Right. The worry there is that going into the season, Kyle Allen, the backup quarterback, or the guy that was with Ron Rivera last year, he said they want to use Antonio Gibson in a Christian McCaffrey-like role. So when fantasy owners see that, they're like, oh my gosh, that means like 8 targets a game and out of the backfield. That means like 15 carries a game. That's like, we want to focus the game around this guy. So everybody's like, let me draft him. He was big going into the drafts. And now we saw it in week 1, he had pretty good volume. And then week 2, and he loses carries to McKissick. McKissick actually gets a goal line carry and gets into the end zone. And not only that, but he's catching stuff out of the backfield. So that's a pretty bad situation. I would say it's still a little, like we said before, it's only week 2. So it's a little too early to worry too much, but I would start to worry only because that involvement scares me. McKissick actually led all running backs last year in catches, and he probably wouldn't have done that if McCaffrey was healthy the whole year, but that concerns me, especially I'm usually giving advice on a PPR league. And in a PPR league, you want those catches. And if Gibson's giving those up to McKissick and once in a while giving up a goal line carry, would start to worry me if I had Gibson. So I wouldn't go as far as trading him too low yet. I mean, like we said, it's only week 2. So hold on to him for another week or 2. They get the Bills this week, which don't have a great run defense. So hold on to him, see how they use him this week, and then maybe we'll reassess after next week.
Okay, reassess next week. This is probably one of the biggest players on this list. It's our last one. Somebody that, I personally used with my first round pick. So you could tell I'm very worried. I also named my team after him, so I'm extra worried. It's Alvin Kamara. What the heck is going on with him, John?
Oh my gosh. I saw your TikTok on Dorm Debate. That was really, really good TikTok. If you have Kamara, don't worry. I know everybody with Kamara is probably really worried right now because week 1, he didn't have a great week 1. Week 2, obviously, they got destroyed by the Panthers. But you got to keep Kamara. The good thing about Kamara is that they're focusing the offense around him. Hopefully Winston can get into a better rhythm so that they can run the ball with more ease. The linebackers will start to respect the passing game. That's going to take a couple of weeks. We knew this was going to take time because Winston can't just come right into the offense like he did week 1 and throw 5 touchdowns every week. So we got to give him time to get into the offense. I mean, Kamara, by mid-season, he's going to be back to full stride. And the good thing about Kamara, why I liked him preseason and going into the fantasy draft, is that he has a great playoff matchup. He plays teams. I know he plays the Carolina Panthers late in the season who don't have a great run defense. So by the end of the season, he has great matchups going into the playoffs if you make your fantasy playoffs. I know it's too early to think about that, but guys, don't worry about Kamara. Please don't trade him yet because you're going to probably trade him at a lower value than he's worth. He's worth a lot. He's really good. He's going to be getting catches out of the backfield. Don't forget, they released Latavius Murray, and Murray had a decent amount of touchdowns last year inside the 5-yard line. So maybe they're going to give it to Kamara. Maybe he gets another 2 or 3 touchdowns from last season. So definitely hold on to Kamara. Don't sell him too low.
I'll do that. I'll hold on to him. Let's move on to our next segment, and this is mainly a fantasy strategy segment, and it's just going to be a list of weekly strategies that you could implement into your fantasy team today. Just basically implement them today, and yeah, they're going to be a weekly thing. So, John, take it away.
So the first fantasy strategy, I love this segment because I want to give you guys some strategies that I'm implementing on my fantasy teams at this point in the season. So one of the ones I'm implementing now, and I've been giving advice on people when they DM me, is I'm saying, don't thin your bench too early in the season, right? It's only week 2. So a lot of people are going to be sending you trades, and they're going to be like, all right, I'll give you Kamara, or I'll give you this player like Cooks, but you give me like Robbie Anderson, and you give me like Tyler Boyd and maybe like Damian Harris, which obviously Cooks is better than all those 3 players, but it's only week 2. Unfortunately, we have yet to see a lot of injuries. McCaffrey is the first big name other than J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards and things like that. But McCaffrey is the first big name to get injured. And unfortunately, there's going to be more injuries this week, next week, and the week after in weeks 3, 4, and 5. So you don't want to thin your bench too early in the season. I would say stay away from thinning your bench. You want those guys because in case one of your wide receivers gets hurt, you might need one of those flex guys to put in there. You might need, if you have Tyler Boyd on your bench, you're like, I'm not using him. Well, he still has yet to get a lot of targets. Last week, we saw him have a much better week than week 1. So what if somebody gets hurt and you need to put Boyd in your flex? That's a solid flex. Boyd is a solid flex option in a 12-team league. So I would say don't thin your bench too early in the season. There's going to be injuries and there's going to be bye weeks. So I'm all in favor of later in the season, optimizing your starting lineup, trading some of your bench players to get a great starting lineup for the playoffs. But right now, don't thin your bench too early. So my second strategy is save your waiver, but be active in free agency. So if you have a good waiver, you're going to want to save it unless you really need to use it, because there are going to be some injuries like Christian McCaffrey. If McCaffrey is indeed out for the season or out for an extended period of time, then yes, Chuba Hubbard is good to use your waiver on him. But every year there's players in free agency that have great years. A couple of years ago, it was Darren Waller. Last year, it probably was James Robinson. You want to be active in free agency. Try to look a week ahead, see if there's any backup running back that could take the job, or if there's a receiver that starts to get a lot more targets, because in these next couple of weeks, keep watching this podcast, and I'll give you some more advice on that. But there's going to be players that you're going to want to pick up because they're starting to emerge as, highly targeted players on their team. And the third strategy right now is maybe some of you drafted defenses that you thought were going to be good, but really aren't. So one of them could be like Washington football team. Their defense is good, but in fantasy, it's not doing that good right now. So you might want to turn to streaming defenses. So what that means is dropping your Washington football team, and each week dropping your defense and picking up a defense that has a good matchup next week. So you might want to start doing that if you drafted a defense that isn't that good, or you drafted a defense that isn't that good in general, or doesn't have a good matchup. So if you drafted somebody like, the Washington football team, they're playing the Bills this week, you're probably going to want to drop them and pick up somebody else, somebody maybe like the Giants or Falcons, or maybe the Cardinals who are playing Jacksonville. So one strategy for that is if you have an extra bench spot, you might want to look a week ahead. So sometimes what I do in my 12-team leagues is right now, it's just before a day or two before week 3. So everybody's looking at the defenses for week 3. Now, if I have a player on my bench, a wide receiver that I don't really care about, if I have like Marquez Callaway or like a Mecole Hardman or something, those guys aren't going to pop off and do amazing. I mean, we saw Callaway, he hasn't really got the targets we want him to. So I would be comfortable with dropping Callaway and picking up a defense that has a good matchup in week 4 so that you don't have to wait for people to waiver for them. It's a good strategy in the sense that you don't have to worry about somebody picking them up next week. You can get them right now. So a team that I used the strategy this week. I picked up the Chicago Bears. They're one of the highly projected defenses for next week, and they're playing the Detroit Lions at home. So it's a divisional game. It should be lower scoring, and Chicago should have a pretty good fantasy day. So I dropped one of my receivers like Marquez Callaway, and I just stashed Chicago. I'm not starting them this week. I started the Panthers, but it's still good to have Chicago for next week because I know they have a good matchup, and I didn't have to risk anybody wavering for them midweek because they saw that they were playing the Lions. So always thinking one step ahead of your opponents.
That's so smart. Do you do that with players too? Like if you don't have a good waiver for the next week, you
Right.
like, oh, okay, Marquise Brown has a really good matchup next week. Like, let me just stash him on my bench.
Definitely. If you have an open bench spot or one of the guys on your bench that you're not partial to, then definitely that's a great strategy. Using it for flex players also. If you see that Marquise Brown in our league, he's available because we're in a 6-team league. But yeah, if you see a guy like that on the free agent and you're like, oh wow, next week he's playing, a really bad team or a team that he could score a lot of points on, let me pick him up so that I could put him in my flex and nobody else can get him. Because what if he has a really good week this week and then people are like, oh, I want to waiver for him. Well, you're like, no, I already have them because I thought a week ahead. So
No, that's great. That's really, really great advice. Let's move on to our last segment of the day, and it's our week 3 predictions. And within this, we will have, injuries, games that John loves, games that John hates, one of John's weekly picks, one of 3, and one of the weekly must sits. So, John, we're going to start off with games that you love and games that you hate. Which games do you love this week?
So the games that I love are games that you should probably be playing your fantasy players in your starting lineup if you have them and they're playing in these games because they're probably going to be high scoring. So the first one is the Chiefs and Chargers. We know the Chiefs don't have a great defense. The Chargers defense has gotten better, but we know the Chiefs are going to be able to put up points on them. So starting players like Mike Williams, you're most likely going to try to start at least in your flex this week. Keenan Allen, you're going to start. Eckler, you're starting. Herbert, you're definitely going to start. And obviously Mahomes, Kelsey. Tyreek Hill did not have a great week last week, but obviously you're starting him if you have him because he was probably your first or second round pick. So anybody that I just mentioned, if you have them on those teams, try to find a way to get them into your starting lineup because this is a game that could easily, both teams could score over 30 points. Another game I like is the Seahawks and Vikings. That game, it's almost guaranteed that they're going to score 25 points each because the Vikings have Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson. You're starting all 3 of them if you have them. Kirk Cousins could be a possible streaming option. And then you saw the Seahawks give up 180 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns to Derrick Henry. So expect a big week from Dalvin Cook. And obviously, if you have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett has been great both weeks so far, which is pretty unusual for Lockett, but you're definitely starting him this week if you have him. Russ, of course, too. Chris Carson. Start all those players if you have them on those teams. And the third one I like is the Bucks versus Rams. Now, a lot of you are saying, well, why do you like this game? Because the Bucks and Rams have great defenses. So don't you think this is going to be a lower scoring game? Well, I actually think it's going to be in the mid-20s. Last year, the last time the Bucks lost a game was against the Rams, and it was 27-24. The Rams won. And in that game, the running backs had horrible games because both of these defenses have great run defenses. So both quarterbacks had to throw the ball a lot of times. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, they had over 12 targets each. I think they both had over 11 catches. And then on the other side of the ball, Antonio Brown seems like he's not going to play. He still could play if he gets 2 negative tests. He was put on the COVID list. But Chris Godwin, Gronk, Mike Evans, even Mike Evans, you're going to start him this week. I know Jalen Ramsey might be on him, but the Bucks like to move Mike Evans around. So you're going to start Evans if you have him, most likely. And Brady, you're going to start. The only one I would consider not starting is Stafford. If you have If you have any better quarterback, I might consider that, because we haven't really seen him have success going to Robert Woods yet. So if he only is going to Cooper Kupp, the Bucs can easily take Kupp out of the game and force him to go somewhere he hasn't been able to go yet. So I would be careful about Stafford. I would rather play Herbert than Stafford this week, or Russ than over Stafford.
Okay, and so now going to the games that you hate.
So there are two games that I hate. So if you have players on these teams, try not to start them in your fantasy lineup. The first is the Saints versus the Patriots. Now, that is probably going to be a lower scoring game. We saw the Saints have a great defense. Patriots have a great defense. They run the ball a lot. The Patriots do. So and obviously, if you have Kamara, you're starting him. Honestly, that's the only player I would start in that game. I wouldn't start Jacoby Myers. I wouldn't start Aguilar. I wouldn't start Callaway. I wouldn't start Winston. I wouldn't start Damian Harris. Any of those guys don't start, because that's going to be a lower scoring game. The only guy that could pop is Kamara. The second game is the Jets versus Broncos. Jared had a really interesting, bold take this on the podcast a few days ago, that the Jets could upset the Broncos. And I think I kind of agree. I think it's going to be a closer game than people think. I think it's going to be lower scoring. The Jets defense has been really good so far. If you guys haven't been watching, they've been sneaky good. Their offense obviously hasn't been good, but their defense has been good. So Teddy Bridgewater, I really don't like this week. Sutton, you're probably starting him if you have him, but ask me on Sunday during my TikTok live if you should start him over another player. Fant, you're going to start if you have him. None of the Jets players you're going to start, maybe Corey Davis, but I'm just saying that's probably going to be a lower scoring game, and I would try to stay away. Don't be like 100% that you're starting anybody that you have on the Broncos against the Jets, because the Jets defense has been playing really good.
Yeah, I really think that Bridgewater, I think last year the Panthers were like 2-0 or 3-0.
Yep.
And then it just started to go downhill. I think that's the same situation with Denver. I think it's just going to start to happen.
Yeah.
And the Jets just haven't had a good game yet. It's got to happen sometime.
Yeah, they do. They have to have it.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to impact injuries for this upcoming week.
So there's 3 injuries that I want to talk to you guys about. And these injuries, I like to talk about injuries because matchups and injuries is what fantasy is about. So if a guy's injured, it's going to affect everybody on their team and everybody on the other team. So a guy like Deontay Johnson, it seems like he probably won't play this week. They still haven't ruled him out. See how his practice goes Friday. See how Saturday goes. Let's see if he plays Sunday. But if he doesn't play, that upgrades Juju into a wide receiver 2. That upgrades Chase Claypool into a flex option. And that downgrades Roethlisberger. You're not probably starting Roethlisberger anyway, but his top target, Deontay Johnson, wouldn't be there. So the main beneficiaries is Juju. Smith-Schuster is now a wide receiver 2 if Deontay doesn't play. And Chase Claypool is a solid flex option in a 12-team league if Deontay doesn't play. And another one is Jarvis Landry. He's only missed 1 game in his career due to injury, and he just got put on IR, which means he's missing at least the next 3 games. So that's gonna basically mean more carries for Nick Chubb, more carries for Kareem Hunt. The Browns are going to be a run-first team, and if there's any wide receiver that I would probably want on the Browns team, it would probably be Rashard Higgins, but I wouldn't even start him. You might want to pick up Rashard Higgins this week. Pick him up if you have a spot on your bench, because he might get 5 to 6 targets. Those tight ends, Hooper, Njoku, and Bryant, are all going to have probably 5 targets each. But if there's a wide receiver that I think you should pick up, it's Rashard Higgins. If you have the spot, pick him up, see how he does the next couple weeks. Odell might play this week, probably not. And even if he does, he's going to be limited coming off that ACL tear. And then the last one is Amari Cooper. Now, Cooper seems like he's probably going to play. He got a limited practice in on Thursday, and they're playing a Monday night game, which gives him an extra day to get ready. But a lot of people are asking me, should I start Dak or should I start Jalen Hurts? And usually I would say Dak, but it's a tough situation because Dak is already missing Michael Gallup, and Hurts is playing a Dallas defense that isn't that great. So the advice I've been giving is start Dak if Amari Cooper plays. If Amari Cooper doesn't play, start Hurts. Because if Cooper doesn't play, he's really got CeeDee Lamb to throw to, maybe Dalton Schultz, and maybe, Cedric Wilson gets a couple targets. But I wouldn't really put my money on Dak if CeeDee Lamb's going to be the only one he's throwing to. So take that advice. I would start hurts if Cooper doesn't play, but it seems like Cooper will play. So fire up Dak in your leagues.
Hmm. Yeah, I actually have Dak in my other league, in my 12-man league, and I didn't have faith in him this week to play against
Okay.
the Eagles, so
Who'd you start?
I put Sam Darnold in
Oh,
because
okay.
as you know, you always got to put a Thursday night guy in there, like so
Right.
that you have some
Yeah.
sort of
You,
you know
you have to have something to look forward to when a Thursday night game comes
yeah
around.
you,
But
you
the
got you got to have a horse in the race.
yeah, but the worst part about that is if he does bad, then all the way until Sunday, you got to look at that red projection.
I
It's just going to be
know.
red. That's like the worst part. So he's got to meet or exceed his projection. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Anybody with McCaffrey, you're probably projected to lose.
Yeah, now it's because he was projected like 24 and he only got 6. So
Hmm.
that's a huge 18-point difference that you got to make up. Oh, that's
Terrible.
tough.
Well, let's keep moving to everyone's favorite, the weekly picks. So you have one that you're going to release today. When are you going to release the other two?
So the other two are probably going to be released on Sunday morning. I post usually around 11 a.m. on TikTok and then at 12 noon on Sunday Eastern time. So 1 hour before kickoff, I go live on TikTok to reveal my weekly picks to somebody who hasn't seen this podcast or hasn't seen my post from Sunday morning. And I also answer everybody's start sit questions. So definitely make sure to join that TikTok live on Sunday, noon Eastern time. We had a big showing last week. We had 17,000 total viewers. Top viewer count was over 1,500 viewers at one time. I was giving rankings, top 5 for each position. I was giving my weekly picks, all 3 my must sits, and I was answering everybody's start sit questions, just going rapid fire while the chat's running. So it goes from 12 to 12:45. So join that if you can, but the rest of my weekly picks will be out on Sunday morning. So my one weekly pick, or one of my weekly picks for this week, and a guy that I think is going to exceed his expectations and his projection is my guy Saquon Barkley. I think this is the week that you need to start him in your lineup because last week and the week before I had Tyson Williams on my 12-team league and I started him over Barkley both of the first 2 weeks. Now I think it's time to put Barkley back in your lineups. He had 10 days to get rest from the Washington game last week. And now he's playing in the Atlanta Falcons defense, which we know is not great. They've given up like 4.8 yards per carry on average this season, which is pretty good. And none of the running backs they played are as good as Barkley. So I think this is the week that you put Barkley into your lineup, put faith in him. I think he's going to beat his projection. I think he's going to have over 100 yards and a touchdown. So make sure he's in your lineups.
He is in my lineup.
Oh,
So
okay.
if you're wrong, I'm going to be on you next week.
Oh, shoot. All right. Hopefully he does well.
All right. And then lastly, we have oh my God, someone's trying to call me. Our weekly must sit. You have one of them for this week. Tell us.
Right. So I usually have 3 must sits. The other 2 will be out during my live on Sunday. But the first one I want to give you, I already touched on this game in games that I hate, and it's the Saints versus the Patriots. It's Damian Harris. I know Damian Harris, he had that huge run for a touchdown last week where he just would not go down. He was just getting help from offensive linemen at the 5-yard line. Three guys were on him, not the Saints players, but I think Jets players. They were on him, couldn't bring him down, and then the linemen come and just push him into the end zone. So huge run for Damian Harris. He did have 16 carries, about 60 or 70 yards and a touchdown, which is a solid like 13 to 15 fantasy points. But I would sit him this week. The Saints have a really good run defense, and they're not going to want to get embarrassed by the Patriots, especially with Mac Jones, not throwing the ball that much. I think the Saints are going to pack the box. I think it's going to be a low scoring game. And like I said, the only guy on that game that I would start is Alvin Kamara.
Amazing. John, thank you so much for your fantasy football advice. And that concludes our first episode of John's Fantasy Football Show. If you guys enjoyed, leave a like. Somebody is texting me. Oh my goodness. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Comment any questions that you have for this upcoming week and maybe the week after, so that we can try and answer all your guys' questions in possibly the next show. We're going to have a nice Q&A segment. So be sure to do that. And we will see you guys next week.